Go ahead.
You're out of time?
Nope. Go ahead.
Get back up.
We're good now.
Okay.
It's a gap.
What I'm saying is, think of the Moedim as little bees sending us information. And if we don't keep the Moedim, we're not receiving the information, so we're looking in the wrong place for health, sanity, wholeness, and reality. So the Moedim are given to us. I mentioned yesterday they're like the pillars holding up the structure. And that, like I said earlier, physicists will tell you nothing is solid. This is all elusive. This is all a vapor. This is all electrons that are so far apart that if you could microscopically look at it, in our solar system, if it is, as some scientists say, we've got the Earth, and then a million miles away there's the Moon, and then a jillion miles away is Jupiter. That's as far apart as the electrons are from each other in their various orbits around the nucleus. It's mostly empty space. It's not solid. Well, at least the proton's solid. No, when you look at it, it's also nothing. It's information. But what I'm saying is, so out of the entire physical universe where nothing is solid, the Moedim are what's solid. He invented the Moedim as the reality, the solid things. So when we read Hebrew, these letters find their meaning not necessarily only in the concept that mem, mayim, means water, ayin means eyeball, dal, dalet, means door, yod means hand, but that's just the physical appearance. The reality of what these letters mean are found in the Moedim. And so, I was going to talk the other day about this concept of the burning bush. So Moshe comes and he finds some bush, a physical structure, and then superimposed on this bush was these flames of fire. It was burning like this inferno. Moshe was out in the wilderness with his sheep, the sheep of his father-in-law Jethro, out in the wilderness. But the word wilderness is also a place of words, language. And what he saw was, there was a physical structure of what's called a bush, which in Hebrew is sanah, which is Samik Nun Hay. And then he saw that there was this raging inferno of a fire, ash, but yet the bush wasn't being consumed. And that word consume is actually bet ayin resh. And so Moshe said, hey, I'm going to turn aside and look and see. And that word for turning aside to look and see is samik resh. You could say, so what am I doing with all these stupid letters? Because you don't know, it's stupid. Because you can't make sense of it, it's insane. But the reality is, in every one of these letters, there's a physical property like water, nail, eye, door, hand, water. You could say, well, those letters don't really mean that. Thank you, Dr. Michael Brown. They do mean that. In this letter, mem, in this configuration of script, is like this wave, and the undertow of the ocean wave, that's kind of like embedded in this shape of the mem. A vav, which is a nail, could be written like that. It's something like one of those tent stakes, which is driven into the ground. This yod hand is like an excavator bucket of a tractor. Pick it up. The letter shapes are exactly, this is an eyeball. It's also a fruit with a seed in it. So what I'm saying is that the particular font, the Erectology font of the Paleo letters, the letters are drawn to illustrate what they do. The letter Zion, which is the number 7, you could almost see the number 7. It's an axe. It means to cut off. It's also our letter G, which came, it looks like disc plow. It came from an ancient letter shape that was a spiked plow that if you pull this direction, it'll leave furrows in the ground. So Yeshua had the Roman flail ripped across his back, ripping open his skin like an open field. It's the seventh letter being put to the weapon. That's how they cut him off. But they also adorned him with weapons. All these things are embedded in the orthography, the shape of the letters. So the point is, what I'm trying to say here is that the letter shapes and the letter names are like the bush. But at the same time, there's this fire, which is the, you might say, the esoteric, which is actually the aleph, the plan, the intention of El Shaddai to superimpose the reality on top of the letters without consuming the letters. It doesn't negate or destroy the letters. The letters are still functionally usable to spell words, but they convey the ash, the fire of Elohim, of El Shaddai, imposing his intention onto his people. They are the vehicle of transference because the vibration, the energy, the frequency is the reality. The reality is that this isn't physical, but yes, it sounds physical. That's like the bush. The reality of the information, the relationship with Yod He Vav He is the fire that is not consuming the bush. And then we see that Moshe turned to look, and then the scripture in Exodus 3 says, when Yahweh saw that Moses turned to look, he then sent the malach, the messenger, the angel, to speak to him through the midst. And the word midst is metok, mem tav vav kaf. In the midst of the Samek Nun Hey, the message was sent. When Moses turned to look, when Moses turned to give regard. So what I'm trying to say is that when we turn to give regard to the Moed, the Moedim, when we turn to give regard to the spelling of the Hebrew letters, that's when the message of the fiery purpose, the Aleph, the word Aleph is not just ox, but it also means to be taught, trained, and domesticated. Shin is the monogram letter of El Shaddai, translated as the omnipotent, the almighty, the devastating force, but also the provider of all benefits. The breasted one, the feminine breast, is a shad. The provision of all benefits that are incorporated into Aleph, the covenant, the Aleph Tav, the Hebrew alphabet. The provision of all benefits is to see the fiery aspect incorporated within the physical aspect. So the word Shana is bush. But it's composed of, the other day when we were writing, I had Nun Samek, which is miracle, which is, as Hugo was saying, it's to be tested, tried, assayed by the Almighty. So Samek is an engineered structure. That's a geometry. Nun is this life force, this sprout, this energy. So the energy that emanates, He as a suffix is the emanation, the appearance. The energy that emanates as a life force out of the geometrical structure, like a crystal, like the DNA, is what the bush is. So what we see in the form of the design is just the carrier vehicle for what's really going on, which is the Aleph of Shin, which is the to be taught, trained, and domesticated by El Shaddai. And that's in the alphabetic letters. And the alphabetic letters find their real meaning by being correlated to the Moedim, which is illustrated by the 7 pieces of the Mishkan and validated, corroborated witness by the testimony of the 7 days of creation. That's what we were talking about yesterday. Does that explain your question?
Good answer.
Oh,
Very
okay,
good answer.
So, this guy, Dutch Sense, what he is doing by trying to read the pressures and frequencies and vibrations that are in the geological strata of the earth, we're doing the same thing by trying to read the messages of the vibrations and the difference of the letters as they compose words. So I'm trying to give these people as a reference because they're looking at one thing and they're fractal models of the whole thing, but they're only talking about a slice. Kangen water says, listen, water, which is the first primary basic compositional element of the entire universe, as in Genesis 1 verse 2, is basically oxygen and hydrogen, which is basically just positive and negative electrons and protons, and yet everything's composed of that. So the concept is, if there's something wrong, drink more water in its purest state, which would be the alkaline form of clean water, which is what Kangen does. That's a product name, but that's a whole other thing. Look it up. Essential oils do the same thing. They extract. How, Linda, could you describe what essential oils are and how they work? Just briefly for the sake of the topic.
Well, the oil of the plant is very similar, compatible with the blood of a human. So it's the condensed energy of the plant, and then us using it, it can, if we're in harmony with it, can raise our vibration. It's like adding more frequency to us. Is that what you mean?
Does everybody understand that?
Helping our frequency to get to a normal frequency.
If you have a broken leg, you use a crutch, which is a replacement leg so that your leg can get more stronger and do what it's supposed to do. It's almost kind of like that. If your frequencies are broken or distorted, you can take the essential oils, which will be like a crutch of putting you back where you're supposed to be until you can resonate sympathetically, like guitar strings tuned to the same frequency. And if one's out of tune, you keep playing. I heard a story from years ago, I've mentioned this before, where back in the olden days when axles of carts were simply a bar of metal, if a guy had his trailer, his carriage out in the middle of the field and it goes down into a rut and bends, it's like, gosh, how do we straighten out this axle? You know, you might have to get a lever and you might have to pull it and pound on it. And there was some guy that came out, and he came out with a little suitcase of little tiny hammers. And he'd just come out there and ding, 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 tap, 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 just generating frequencies. And the frequencies would actually cause that metal to conform to a straight line the way they were forged originally. No pressure, just tunes, frequency. How does it do that? That's the question. How does it do that? The fact is that it worked. And as John would say, is that a fact? Do you know for sure? It's like, no, I don't. That's a story I heard. Maybe it's not true, but it sounds good enough to use as a story, so we'll do that. That's what the essential oils are doing. They're doing ding, ding, ding. They're giving us the pure tone frequencies so that our body will go, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be. Thank you. There I am. It's like going to a chiropractor. Essential oils are like going to a frequency chiropractor.
They fill in the blanks. If you're missing somewhere, they can fill in the blanks and make that area stronger.
There you go.
A congestion of electricity, like it was congestion, and it helps to decongestion.
Well, that's what Dr. Alfonso Manzo is doing.
Right.
By using
Right.
TKM, or what does he call it? Can we use the name of
Aleph
what
Tav body.
The what?
Aleph Tav body.
Aleph Tav body. So if you go to, he hasn't yet published his book, but it will be called Aleph Tav body. And he's talking about how there's congestion of energies, and if you put your hands in different places, it bypasses, like when you're doing road work and they create a detour. That's what his whole study is, therapy, and it works. Does it work, Jim?
Removing congestion, yes.
It works.
In
Yes.
many ways.
Yes.
Project 314 is a fellow by the name of Andrew Hoy. You can go onto the internet. There's a limited amount of information because he has yet to publish something. But the point is, he has determined that the picture that we've been given throughout all these years, that the Mishkan tabernacle of Exodus 25 to 35 was a rectangle, is wrong. The information has been sitting there all these years, and people have assumed because somebody else said it was built such and such a way that that's the way it was built. But yet in him doing research, him being this engineer, architectural engineer, he realized there's all these different ideas of the way it went together. So he looked a little closer and realized it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. There's some big problems with the analysis of the script compared to the pictures they've given us, which are supposedly a description of the script.
Well, didn't it give the dimensions?
The dimensions were given to an extent, but there's a lot of assumptions, and when he started assuming something different, he realized the Mishkan was round, it wasn't rectangular. What? 3.14 is pi. That's what Project 314 is. He goes on to explain it. It's incredible. You listen to his presentation, and it's like, now which sounds more plausible, the rectangular version or his round version? And I got to say, hands down, without a question, his sounds more plausible. Does that mean it's true? No, but it's more plausible than the alternative that we've been fed for all these years, just like what every one of these people are saying. James McKinney, could you describe his research briefly?
Yeah, he studies that the solar system and the universe is held together by electrostatics. And by studying that, you can determine all the orbits, all the characteristics that we see.
So he's basically looking at the fabric of the universe. He also did a study in the, you might say the formula by which you can determine prime numbers was thought to be non-existent. So even Pythagoras and even Isaac Newton and anybody else looking to find how to calculate prime numbers was totally elusive, and somebody actually even got, I think, as I understand the story, a Nobel Prize for proving that prime numbers can't be calculated. And the same year, James McKinney wrote a book called Calculating Primes, where he says, oh, here's the formula for calculating prime numbers. The very interesting thing about that book, and this is my takeaway from his book, is that you have certain stepping stones for calculating prime numbers. Take this consideration, this consideration, this consideration, yep, those are prime numbers, and all of a sudden, oh, no, wait a minute, that's not a prime number. I must have the wrong formula. Let's try it again. Come up with some other formula, take these certain steps, and all of a sudden you land on a number which is not a prime number, and you must have the wrong formula. So for centuries, everybody stopped when they realized that next step is not a prime number. But what he found is that there's two formulas. The first formula gives you certain steps, and one of the steps is you have to step on a false prime. And you take like 2 steps past the false prime, turn around, apply the second formula, which erases the false primes, and all you have left is prime numbers. And then you take a few more steps with the first formula, knowing that you're stepping on a false prime, but you got to use it to get to the next step, and then you turn around and erase the false primes. What am I saying? I realize this is what happened with Christianity. They took real steps, and then they stepped on part of the doctrines, a false prime. Did Yeshua get crucified? Yes. Was he born of a virgin? I believe so. Did he rise from the dead? Yes. Hey, let's celebrate Sunday, Christmas, and Easter. No, those are false primes. Going back to the Torah erases the false primes. But is he still Mashiach? Yes. What do I mean by Mashiach? Does it mean he was anointed? Well, sure he was anointed. Hey, who anointed him? Is that another false prime? The word Mashiach, as we mentioned the other day, is Mem, Shin, Yod, Chet. Mem puts it into the noun state of place or operation or tool of use, and Shin, Yod, Het is the word which means to converse. We're conversing. Conversing is words. Words are the Hebrew language composed by the fixtures of the Moedim. So is he the manifestation of the Moedim, the Hebrew letters, in human form? Yes, that's what he is. So is he Mashiach? Yes, by that definition of the word, he is the composition of the truth of the Hebrew letters, not the fake Hebrew letters like ox, house, camel, door, window. Though those are not fake, they're the Sanah version, but he is the Esh version, synchronized, not eradicating or consuming the physical version, but he is the real life of El Shaddai in every one of the letters. That's Mashiach. And is that Yeshua? Yes. But he wasn't born on Christmas Day of December 25th. It was either probably Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month, or at the first day of Sukkot on the 15th day of the 7th month. It was probably one of the two. That's a whole other discussion. Was he crucified? Yes, indeed. It's Roman history that Pontius Pilate, the governor of Palestine, Judea, ordered him to be crucified. It's in the alphabet letters. Hey Vav Zion, put into a tomb, Het Tet Yod. But he resurrected the letter Zadi, ascended letter Kuf, and he's coming back, Resh Shin Tav. Was it on the day of Ishtar? No! The crucifixion happened basically between the 14th and 15th afternoon of the first month. Whether or not any pagans were celebrating the fertility goddess has nothing to do with the Moedim. That's a counterfeit. So we have no regard for Christmas and Easter. Was he raised Sunday morning, the first day of the week? No. The calculations are that he was probably crucified on what we call Wednesday, and then he would have arisen Saturday night. 3 days and 3 nights buried in the heart of the earth. Different calculation. That means Good Friday is a myth, a fabrication, a lie, never happened. Good Friday doesn't exist. It's a counterfeit. So is the resurrection Easter morning of Sunday. Didn't happen. It's a lie. Neither was his name Jesus. That was invented 500 years ago. So anybody saying Jesus is the name above all names, bad frequency. Doesn't correlate to the vibe of reality. That's why there's a problem with the name Jesus. That's why there's a problem with Sunday, Christmas, and Easter, because the frequencies are out of sync. Back in the days right before World War II, one of Hitler's men, I think his name was spelled Goebel, Goebel, determined that 440 should be the universal frequency for the letter A, the note A. Other people were using 432, and other people have found, the cymatics, the Chladni, that 432 frequency is a geometric structure that's in nature. Not 440, that's a distortion. But by imposing 440, they were able to impose corruption, which imposed bad thinking, which imposed bad health. Because our cells then are out of resonance, because our cells are absorbing frequencies, which is why, as we were talking the other day about eating certain foods, hearing certain sounds, our brain interpolating different languages and different words, and our feet walking out the regal of the Moedim, puts us back in sync. And what I'm trying to say by the point of this entire study, as Dr. Emoto found, messages in water, even if it can't be duplicated, what supposedly he's found is that you could take water molecules under high microscopic photography and find the molecules to look clustered and distorted, and you can simply write the word, maybe in English, maybe in Chinese, just write the word thank you. And the water molecule turns into a crystal, a beautiful crystal, instead of this molten glop. You write the word I love you, or you say the words, or you play music. Music, words, writings, pictures change the molecular configuration of a cluster of water molecules. The human body is technically composed of more than 90% water. Our very being, our brain functions because we have water happening in our brain. Water and fat, basically, is what the brain uses, right? The point is, if we put in the pure water, if we put in the words, the thoughts, the sounds, the light, Dr. Ott, O-T-T, found that certain frequencies of light contributed to mental clarity and processing. Somebody else was mentioning about turpentine, ingesting a certain amount of pure gum turpentine mixed with sugar, clarifying, detoxifying, getting rid of parasites. There's all these different studies of how to get better. If we do nothing, we'll linger and deteriorate. And if we go along with the system as we were given, as in Jeremiah 16:19, we have inherited false things from our ancestors. That word false, things that have no profit, is like a GMO, just been genetically modified, and the life has been taken out of it, and it can't replicate, reproduce the geometry the structure has been corrupted so that there's no life emanating from it. Going back to the Moedim, going back to Hebrew, going back to the water, the oil, the various other considerations, the sounds, will restore the structure, restore the life potential, and the expression manifest will be as the plan of El Shaddai, which is why he gave Israel to the world, which is why he gave his son to humanity, Yeshua, which is why he gave us the Hebrew language, which is why he gave us the Moedim. For us, as we walk, we are participating in the real event, not just intellectual, not just the emotional assent, but we're actually engaging like gears that are functioning, meshing together as we walk out the Moedim, eating unleavened bread for a week, counting for 50 days, blowing trumpets or making noise on the first day of the 7th month, as we humble ourselves, whether or not you eat and fast on the 15th day, or on the 10th day of the 7th month, but then as we rejoice with a party and fellowship together for 7 days in the 7th month, and the final day that everybody seems to forget, Shemini Atzeret, the 22nd day of the 7th month. You know, an interesting thing that comes to mind as I'm talking about Shemini Atzeret, I bought a Toshiba, I think it was, video disc manufacturing tool device years ago, put in something to duplicate, ran the program, everything else, took the disc out, gave it to somebody that couldn't play it. Why? What went wrong? I followed all the instructions, but I missed something. There was one line on page 42 down in the corner that they didn't even highlight. Finalize. Finalize? What does that mean? They didn't even explain it. What the heck? If you don't finalize, it's not, as it were, sealed. Therefore, it didn't print. Therefore, you thought you did all the other instructions right. You thought you had an item that could be replicated, reproduced, handed to some other so they get the information, but because it was never finalized, it was worthless. It couldn't communicate. Shemini Atzeret is like the finalize of the 7 Moedim. But by calling Shavuot 2 festivals instead of 1, I believe it's a 50-day festival lining up with Memnoon, lining up with the labor, and it's conception, gestation, and giving birth. Noon is number 50, Noon is the sprout jumping out, Noon is giving birth. It's 1 festival, 1 moed, 1 regard. When you call it 2, Shemini Atzeret gets bumped. That's what's called, Atzeret is the final stoppage, which is to say that's the day that you don't work, and it's always disregarded. It's called Simchat Torah, it's called the last great day, other people call the other, but by not regarding Shemini Atzeret. Shemini is also the word for the number 8, it's also the word for my oil. Gee, there's 10 bridesmaids, and why do not 5 get in? They didn't have the oil, were they not finalized, and so they missed the communication? Just saying, it's an interesting thing. When you drop off that last command, it might ruin everything that you thought you were doing. Yeah.
Well, Shavuot starts with a waving of a sheaf,
Yes.
and ends with a waving of 2 bread. So the waving is significant. The start and the end.
Like the Aleph and the Tav.
Yes, yes.
So like Pesach and Shemini Atzeret. The interesting thing about this correlation of bookends, Pesach is the evening of the 14th, and then the first day of unleavened bread goes on then for 7 days. So that's 1 day and then 7. And at the end, you've got 7 days of Sukkot and 1 day of Shemini Atzeret. So you've got 1 and then 7, and at the other end, you got 7 and then 1. They're like opposing bookends. Just an interesting concept to regard. Again, without elaborating too much, we're saying all these things are the reality. And the purpose of this energy conference is that you can listen to all these guys talk about their thing, and I don't believe any of them will talk about what we just talked about. Right. Which is to say, if you want to know the truth, the plumb line of truth is in the Moedim, of the Hebrew alphabet, of Yahuwah's personal ornamentation, revelation of himself, his own heart, his own mind, his own character, which is manifest fully in Yahusha, not Jesus, because Jesus is the word that represents the counterfeit. The one who was born on Christmas, died on Easter, or resurrected on Easter, and that gave us then Sunday, and has his Holy Spirit tell all his disciples to obliterate the commandments, the mitzvot, the edot, The
celebrate
Chokim,
with a ham sandwich.
and eat a ham sandwich in his honor. That guy is the counterfeit. But the real Yahusha is the one who is the pure embodiment, pure frequency of each of these. And that's what I believe the solfeggio tones were a model of, a fractal image of, is the pure tones, which if you have those tones going on, there is health and there is sanity, because those tones will have the frequency of our cells become what they're supposed to be, like the guy tapping. So what I'm saying about the solfeggio tones, according to the research of Dr. Puleo, to go back to the beginning of this talk, the church hid those tones in a song called the Ode of St. John the Baptist, the Ode to St. John the Baptist. And they replaced the solfeggio notes with what we now have is the gamut, gamut, re, resonaire, mi. Every one of the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti used to be si, which was Santo Jonas, St. John. They gave us an 8-note octave, 7-note scale, instead of the original 6-note scale, where the 7th note would be the resolve, what we call octave, but octave is 8. So we have now octave meaning 8, or octave meaning the full package of the gamut wordplay. The point is, the health, the healing that was in the solfeggio was counterfeited by the 8-note octave, and so the power, the effect, was destroyed and lost, but they retained it hidden, and when Dr. Joseph Puleo found it, they were outraged, and attempts were made on his life. I don't know what ended up causing him his loss of life, but here we are. There you go. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes.
Well, I'm looking at the energy of being outside. We're seeing this green, which is the middle of the spectrum, the balanced color between the red of the earth, the blue of the sky. We've got this green that we behold, which is balance. We're hearing the birds, which are healing tones. And as we speak, as you said, as we speak Ivrit, we are readjusting our DNA. So if we play the Torah in the background in our houses every day, is it going to be a frequency that helps to heal us?
Just so you know, this may be strange words, but just for the record, DNA can get fragmented, DNA can get altered, but DNA can also get put back together properly. And other studies have shown that DNA is actually an antenna which sends messages back and forth to the Creator and to each other. We have no idea what DNA really is, but some research, and I don't have the names of the guys that have done it, but some research has shown that if you want to have like television or radio reception, you have a certain size and shape and orientation aiming of a antenna. And if you break the antenna, you'll get distorted communication or none at all. Our DNA, if it gets corrupted by Wi-Fi, by electrical, by computers, by various other things, by GMO foods, by concrete, by all these various different means, chemtrails can fragment DNA, vaccines, and though you notice no significant or evident effect, it's having an effect. And I believe that Yahuwah gave us the remedy. Ivrit, Moedim, Yom HaShabbat. 52 days of Shabbat, that as we sit down, the 7 Moedim with 8 more Yoms of Shabbat, as we sit down on those days and regard His ways and His name and His construction and instruction, our DNA will be repaired. That's what I think is happening. And then, if certain great theologians can convince us that this is all bogus insanity, thank you for those 2 words, Mr. Brown, then we will never be repaired. And we will never be put back on track.
What's his name?
Dr. Michael Brown? If you have any questions, just ask. He has a YouTube site called Ask Dr. Brown. Go ahead, ask him. See if he lines up with the Moedim. See if he aligns with Yom HaShabbat in the name Yud He Vav He, Yahweh Eloheinu. That's the plumb line of truth.
Hallelujah.
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 Shalom. Thank you
Shalom.
for joining us.
Shalom. Thank you.
You know, one thing I was thinking when you